Afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Hello. How are you all doing? You all good? You ready? So, the final session of the day, to finish off, with two gentlemen that don't need any introduction. See you later.
I thought he was going to do that gag. I like it.
Anyway. Do you actually do anything with the forward-looking statement?
No, we don't. We press the button, and then we show our session title, which is so long that it had to go on to a second session title slide.
You're welcome.
Yes. Beautiful. Hi, I'm Mike Vandelinder.
Oh,
wait a minute, no. You're Mike Vandelinder. What do you do here, Mike?
Hey everyone, I'm product manager at Jamf, primarily working in the world of identity and Jamf Connect, which will be a topic of conversation here today.
And I am Sean Rabbit, a senior consulting engineer for identity and access management. And you've heard me say this before, I write manuals so you all can ignore them. Thank you for joining.
One thing to note, I would say, is there's another session right next door right now. That's kind of the practical application of a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. Features that have been introduced inside a product. Our friends at Toast next door actually went through the implementation process. You're here if you want to leave, don't. But there is going to be a recording later, so I encourage you to check that out because there's going to be some good practical information from that presentation.
We have locked the doors. You're stuck with us.
Do you want to talk the agenda?
Yeah, we're going to be talking about some best practices for handling privileges on your macOS fleet. We're going to talk about how Jamf Connect can help you out with this task, especially with new features involving the menu bar application. We'll talk about configuring it, and there's a couple of gotchas out there that we want to have, as well as a Q&A section, and I have a question for the audience then, too, so that'll be even more fun. So,
does Ben have to bring the microphone up to you?
No, Ben doesn't have to bring a microphone to me. I have a mic. Life is good.
Got it. So I've got a little bit of a preamble before we kind of get into the meat of the topic. Privileges on the Mac really haven't changed, you would think, too much in the last 20 years. I think as admins, we've had to face more or less the same binary choice for that period of time, where you need to decide, are my users on these Macs going to be standard users, or are they going to be administrators? And that's kind of the, the motivation for us to invest in the product, build these features, and then try to have this talk. People are just now still asking the question of where do you want to apply those privileges to your users. What you may not know is that over the course of the last 5 years, 10 years, the difference in the delta between a standard user on the Mac and an admin on the Mac have been closer and closer. You may not realize all the different situations in which you probably don't actually need to be an admin anymore. Myself, I've been running as a standard user for the last 6 months out of choice to see what exactly the problems are that I'm going to be running into. But yeah, that's the preamble.
And you can do a lot of things with a standard account now that you couldn't do before, like little simple things like changing the wallpaper on your machine. But of course, you still need admin rights to add a printer. So should we give everyone admin rights? No. According to this government guidance here, the answer is no. And apologies, I didn't have a chance to update the slide for the NIST 800 guidance that just updated, I don't know, 3 days ago or so. So thanks, NIST. We appreciate you updating that for us there. Anything you'd like to talk about here with this wonderful world, too, or want me to keep
I'm good. No, you go.
That's perfect. OK, so NIST 853, of course, and CIS guidelines all say you should not have admin rights at all times. UK Cyber Essentials goes one step further, annoyingly, and says you should have a completely different, separate account, because apparently privilege access management isn't available in the UK. They haven't quite caught up to it yet there. So the idea is that we need to make sure that our users understand that we're doing this in their best interest, and the best interest isn't just us saying we have to do it. This is actually guidance coming down from on high. Many times when you're in a highly regulated industry, or if you're just trying to keep up with best practices, follow what they say. Make a person a standard account. Cyber Essentials, we have some trickery there that you might be able to still use this. So. Mike, let's go on to the next place. Where are we at today?
Yeah, so if you don't know, we do have a product named Jamf Connect currently, the point of which is to be able to integrate with cloud identity providers to automate a lot of tasks on the Mac. So I want to talk about a few of the things that relate to privilege management that we can do with Connect currently. First off is out of the box, what are you actually able to do to provision that first user account on a Mac? With the Jamf Pro, with pre-stages, there are ways that you can make that decision. Again, the binary choice, all net new user accounts could be standard users, they could be administrators. We wanted a way to make that a little bit more dynamic so that based on information back from the cloud identity provider, as a part of the user's authentication, as you're creating that first user account on that new Mac out of the box, we can make that decision and say, oh, users of that group, you can be an admin. Users of that group, you're going to be a standard user. So we have that full network-based authentication at the login window to get that information. Not only is it part of the account provisioning, though, it's going to be with every additional login. So you can imagine that you're going to be reassessing those users' privileges over time. You don't necessarily want them to stay in that elevated state just because you did it at the beginning. Users change roles, groups. You want to be able to reevaluate that with every login. So that's, again, part of that whole network-based authentication. There are situations where you're not necessarily going to have a network connection. So like I said, we can use Connect to gate that whole gate the login process to the Mac. We're going to use the IDP. We're going to use your authentication policies. You have many different multi-factor authentication capabilities available to you as a part of that login process or the account provisioning process. But there are going to be situations where you don't have a network access. You're going to be on a plane, going to a conference, and you still want to have that policy that requires that that user goes through some sort of verification process. So we do have an offline MFA feature built into Connect. You can register a device, mobile device, use your authenticator application of choice, maybe the same authenticator application you're using for push notifications for network-based MFA, but you can register that application to generate one-time passwords. So you have the flexibility to create the policies for your users to log into their Mac, where if they have a network connection, great, sign into Okta, sign into Google, sign into Entra ID. If you don't have a network connection or you don't even want to integrate with an identity provider, you can then force that you have that one-time password challenge to get access to your Mac. So unlock your Mac with File Vault and your password. Next step, some sort of MFA, be it network-based or offline-based one-time password.
And again, this goes along with anybody who's in one of those highly regulated industries where they're getting mandated by PCI 4, they have HIPAA compliance requirements, PII is on the device, they're dealing with New York State high compliance requirements for financial services industries. Mandates are coming from on high saying you have to have multi-factor authentication for every device that can possibly access that information. This is a solution for that problem.
Where Connect started, those many years ago, was based in password management. We want to make it easier, again, to provision those net new user accounts on a Mac using IDP credentials, but we want to be able to make it easier for those users to continuously sign in, understand what their credentials are to access the Mac. We can leverage your IDP, single sign-on, make the Mac participate in single sign-on, and synchronize the password from your IDP to the Mac. So when you go to unlock your Mac, with, again, wake from sleep, File Vault, et cetera, what's the password? It's whatever I use to sign into my identity provider. Connect keeps those passwords in sync over time, so if you end up changing your password off the box, if you do it on your phone, different device, if your password has to change on any calendar basis with some frequency, when those things happen, when those events occur, those password changes initiate the sync on the device, and again, you can just keep that Mac in sync and let it participate in single sign-on. One of the side benefits is if you are in a situation where you still have on-prem resources, you use Kerberos for single sign-on and authentication, Connect when we authenticate the user back to the IDP, when we sync the password, part of this, again, the benefit of that is we can then reach out to AD, we can grab the tickets and refresh the tickets for the user on an ongoing basis. So you've got kind of that beginning to end single sign-on story from booting the Mac, signing into your IDP, and being authenticated to the rest of the resources they may need. Added privilege elevation here, even though this is kind of the larger topic that we'll be getting to later, but these are all the features. So what we wanted to enable was a self-service model for an end user who is probably a standard user by default. Again, we can use Connect Login, to make those determinations dynamically as the user is signing in, when we're creating the account, should it be a standard user or an admin. In the case where they're a standard user, there are situations today where you would need to be an administrator just to help yourself. We wanted a way to enable those users, at least for some temporary period of time, to become an admin and help fix their own problem without having to necessarily open up a help desk ticket and go through that process. So we'll go in more detail about what this feature is, but it's relatively new to Connect within the last, let's say, 6 months. And then finally, one of the larger areas of Connect that we're not going to cover too much here today is all of our policy-based network access controls. So it's not delivered through the classic Connect app for the Mac. It's part of Jamf Trust, but it is part of the Connect story. And the point is that we need to be able to leverage what we know about the device, what we know about the user, to gate access to private resources. So only an authenticated user on an authorized device should be able to access some application, some service. Using our ZTNA capabilities, you can build all that logic. You can have the policies that refer back to the device risk score and create those policies to gate access, again, to those particular web applications.
Frankly, if you're going to be getting Kerberos tickets, you probably need to get on that Prem network in order to use that Kerberos ticket for some purpose of company fun. I use fun very loosely.
Kerberos and fun.
Yes, 2 words that have never been uttered together in one presentation. So, people ask me this all the time. Has platform single sign-on Sherlocked all the purposes of Jamf Connect? And if you just listen to all of the things that were just talked about there in that last couple of bits of slides, we have an answer available for you, and that is no. So things like the fact that Apple themselves say that passcodes are essential for the security of all Apple devices. You know, if you have an iPhone, that if you turn it off and you turn it back on again, what's the first thing it does? It asks you for a passcode. Same thing with your Apple, your MacBook Pro, same thing there. There is no such thing, unfortunately, as a passwordless system. There's nothing about PSSO that makes it passwordless. And subsequently, there's nothing about Jamf Connect that can make it passwordless for you, too. There's no FIDO2 token support. PSSO has no MFA support. It's not magic. It's still just a password at the login screen. So, the other piece of this, I'm going to grab your clicker here too. The other side of this is there's only 2 providers that actually can use platform single sign-on at this time, Microsoft Entra ID and Okta Identity Engine, specifically if you're on the Identity Engine piece, not a classic engine. Where we do fit in, however, is where there's multiple platform single sign-on authentication methods. There is a password method that you can use with PSSO, which basically replicates that on-prem binding experience, but using the cloud. That's some place where Jamf Connect would basically be replaced because something else is taking and linking up that local password to the cloud identity provider. However, in the case of smart cards or the case of a secure enclave-backed key, you still need a local account password on that Mac. When you run a software update, it always will ask you for a password. Why? Because it takes a while for it to download that 16 gigabyte file of operating system update, and it's going to have to replay your credentials at some point in order to do the actual installation. You can't replay credentials from a certificate with a PIN at that particular point, but you can replay a password, so you're always stuck with it. And secure enclave-backed key actually does not do anything to the local password, so it's kind of interesting. You have this nice secure, almost FIDO2-based token built into your Mac at that point. You've essentially glued a YubiKey into a USB port in your Mac, but the local account password doesn't have anything to do with anything. So you could still use Jamf Connect to make sure that you have the password in sync. Now, of these 2 providers, only Microsoft Entra ID can handle the smart card and the secure enclave-backed key. Right now, Okta only supports password. They will be making some sort of announcements at Okta that I will not reveal now. But you can go to Octane next 2 weeks here, and they'll be talking about it. We will be doing another session tomorrow on platform single sign-on and how it ties into the Mac operating system in Jamf Pro. That will be with Michael Epping and Johan Olin at Microsoft, and that'll be tomorrow afternoon. But our guidance right now is that you can still use in secure enclave mode Jamf Connect to be your onboarding and ongoing password sync, as well as privilege elevation feature, and making sure that you have a consistent password that meets your minimum requirement policies from the cloud identity provider.
So like we said with Connect, we have an ability to act as a plugin at the login window. It can be the first application you deploy as a part of a pre-stage when you're enrolling and managing a new Mac. And you can create a configuration to ensure that that identity provider acts as that gateway for creating that first user account. All this done on the back end by creating an application registration in the IDP, and we've used OpenID Connect primarily as that protocol for being able to authenticate the user. When you authenticate with the IDP, we actually get two things back as a part of that process. There's an access token to authorize the user, but then there's also an ID token so we can get some information about who that individual is that's trying to access that device. So the best way to illustrate what that ID token is just to compare it to, say, something like a driver's license, because it's something that comes from a central trusted authority.
It's a literal token that happens to have your identity on it. So
you've got all the details that you need about the individual, right?
Yeah.
You've got names, photos, but then there's also the concept of individual endorsements or restrictions, different classes of vehicles you're able to drive, glasses, that kind of a thing. All of that is very much the same in the world of OpenID Connect and the ID tokens, because what you end up getting back is basically a plain text readout of all these different claims and attributes for those users. And that's what we use inside of Connect to make a lot of different decisions. Now, between the different identity providers, these tokens can look pretty different. Though it's a standard protocol, the claims aren't necessarily standardized. You're going to get group claims from Okta through some work. You're not necessarily going to get those group claims from Microsoft or Google. But in the end, that's all just documentation and configuration, and we can figure out what the right path is, for every individual organization and what they use internally. The point is that we have that information available during that account provisioning process with every sort of user login as well. So we want to be able to rely on that information to make some logic decisions about what that user should be able to do on that device. I can't even see.
This is just another example here for you using an Okta tenant, for example. So we can actually pull group information to what Mike was talking about. Instead of having a role attribute, we could list a whole pile of groups that come out there and use that as an option for saying this person's a member of a specific group, and so therefore they can be elevated perhaps. So.
Right, depending on how you manage your identity provider internally, it may be something you're also responsible for. It may be an entirely different team. There may be change management processes involved in getting these applications the way that you need them to behave for Connect to get the information that it needs. You might be able to modify roles a little bit more easily to have kind of the bespoke information that you want to automate the process inside of Connect. You might be able to rely on groups because that's, let's say a universally used claim across different applications inside of your environment. But again, it goes back to what that IDP is capable of and what you want to be able to leverage and customize to automate some of these tasks.
And if we build this one out here, I want to make a point too on the groups. So there is actually a physical limit to how big the identity token can be. Otherwise, your group information might get yeeted off of the token and into another world. So if, let's say that you're an organization that launches rockets into space, I won't name which one, and you have 1.5 billion groups, if you try to send every group in the token, it's going to cause you problems. So you can actually go in and filter in most identity providers to say, I only want a subset of those groups available. In this case, it's just showing a group named Jamf Connect Standard.
There's a lot of customization options that go along with what you can do at the login window. Again, if you want to be able to leverage those groups to assign privileges to those users, great. If you want to just have a standardized, don't assess that. Let's just use the pre-stage or something else to ensure that these are admins and keep them admins over time. Awesome. All of those are, say, configurations available both inside of our configuration tool called Jamf Connect configuration, a very clever name, or you can do it inside of Jamf Pro.
Now, in this case, we're going to take a look at the two most popular providers here. One is going to be Microsoft Entra ID. The most common way to do this is to simply create a role attribute as part of the app registration. So the role attribute, you can actually then turn around and assign additional either groups or individual people to the role later. So the idea being here that maybe you have a group of users that should become administrators all the time, say like IT admins, or maybe you just have a one-off like Mike that should absolutely positively be restricted to standard accounts. Sorry. Not that we don't love you. In that particular case, you have the options to be able to do that and assign individual pieces. It's in a different place, by the way, because Entra is confusing. You have to create the you have to create the app registration under app registrations, and then you assign the users under enterprise applications. A little bit confusing how that works. Also note that you will not get a role attribute unless you purposely say user assignment is required in order to do this. So you would basically, if you didn't have a user assignment allowed, you would be sending out a blank role, which Jamf Connect will interpret as being not an admin role. So that will become a standard account. Okta is a little bit different. I'm actually showing Okta as an OIDC app here because it makes it a little bit easier to see how it works. You go into your app registration that you create in Okta and edit the claims that are going to be sent. And from here, we can actually go in and modify which groups I want to send down. They don't have the concept of a role attribute. Also, side note, Okta does not have the ability to modify the claims that are sent outside of the standard information that would be sent in a profile. So you get username, you get user's real name, you get the preferred username, email address, and you can add groups. If you add those groups in there, you can then add your scopes to say, hey, I want the group membership to be added into me in that ID token, so that way you could use that for purposes of privilege elevation. But what about Google, you ask? Google does not let you modify a token at all. There was one button, and they pressed it for you before it left the factory. So with Google, you have basic information, username, username, and the user's real name. Nothing else. There are no group attributes that are available to you there. So in this particular case, the next piece of menu bar privilege elevation will be far more important. You could make everybody a standard account, for example, and then use this cool feature to elevate on demand.
That's right. So like we said, with standard users, again, it's fewer moments where you have to be able to elevate to an administrator to perform some sort of a function. Even software updates now, while it still requires a password, doesn't necessarily require you to be an admin. But if you do need to install an application for yourself, if it's not available inside of self-service, if it's not available in the App Store, chances are you're going to need to have an administrator password to install that application. Something that affects the system settings, applications, those are the most common things. So in this situation, I'm a remote employee, I buy a nice new photo printer, I want to be able to use it on the Mac. It's not something that has the drivers necessarily already deployed to me. It's not available inside of self-service. I want to be able to install this printer driver on my Mac at home.
Oh, Mike, every Jamf admin loves adding printers.
So in that situation, because it's a system setting, you're going to be prompted for admin privileges. In this situation, I don't have admin privileges. I'm a standard user, but we do have that new feature inside of Jamf Connect. It's a menu bar application, presents all the different settings and configurations that are currently set, but that option there is for self-promoting, right? It's fairly easy, I think, to educate somebody where to go to find that feature should they need it, but when you click on the button, you're going to get that set of privileges assigned to that user temporarily. The default is for 5 minutes, but there's going to be some interaction with that user to let them know that you have these privileges now. You do your action, install printer driver, and when you're done, either the time expires, you get a notification that that has happened, or if you want to be able to, I guess, manually revoke those permissions, you have that capability as well.
But Mike, I didn't see anything about identity at all in that sample video.
We want it to be as simple as possible to be able to deploy that type of a capability to your end users. If you don't want to put any sort of roadblocks in front of them to have access to that feature, great. You can make it a one-click operation as a part of Jamf Connect. Again, there's just the default settings to be that privilege for 5 minutes of time. You can ramp up that complexity as much as you want and or need. We have the configuration tool, JCC, Jamf Connect configuration, to be able to go through and test out and implement those features. You can also do the same thing again through Jamf Pro. So there's some options here, but examples. In the case of just simple deployment, the only thing you want Connect to do, no IDP integration, I just want that menu bar icon, and I want to have that menu bar option for becoming a local administrator. Again, when you do that, you're going to get a countdown inside of the menu bar, so you can see that as that user. You can get those notifications when you're promoted and when you're demoted back to standard user. If you want to start ramping up the complexity, you want to be able to safeguard access to temporary privilege elevation behind some other piece of information that you know about the user, probably from the identity provider. You want to require authentication, maybe even multi-factor authentication, so that not anybody could click that button in the menu bar. You have to sign in as a particular, or as an authorized user at least, and fully authenticate to get access to that. Great, one-click option. You do need to have the rest of the IDP settings there that you would use for password sync and account provisioning, but it's all the same applications behind the scenes.
This way you can make sure somebody still works for the company before they become an admin.
But everything that we're talking about with account provisioning and local login and trying to decide out of the box, should a user be a standard user, admin, being able to inspect that ID token and making those decisions, we can use that exact same information here. So even if you're able to authenticate as a valid employee, you may not actually be authorized to become a temporary admin. You want to be able to scope access to that capability behind the scenes by leveraging your identity provider. So if you wanted it to be to a particular group, particular role, you can make that decision inside of the IDP. When we authenticate the user inside of Connect, based on that ID token and that response, we can gain access to, again, whether they're going to be an admin or not.
This is also a great situation for people that might need to do remote hands work as well. So maybe the identity, maybe the person who's doing remote hands signs in with their identity, username and password, and they're part of a group that lets them have privilege elevation, but the normal user does not belong to a group that gives them privilege elevation. Remote hands person can get elevated, normal user cannot.
Again, we can add complexity. We can put more restrictions around what you're able to do or how often, again, you're able to become a local administrator. So, like I said, the base amount of time that you could become a local admin is 5 minutes. You can put whatever arbitrary integer you want in there. So if it's for an hour, for a day, you can kind of make those decisions for yourself, but you have that pathway to enable those users for some set period of time. You can also limit the number of times that a user is able to elevate, so you don't want necessarily people abusing the system, becoming administrator every 5 minutes, every hour of every day. You can limit it to being 5 times a month, 10 times a month, whatever, again, kind of fits your organization. Again, I cannot see that.
This is the user choices.
Got it.
I was told not to hide jokes in any of the slides because it was distracting, so I apologize for my general mayhem in here. So I obviously didn't listen. I did not listen to that statement at all, so anyway.
We can, as a part of the privilege elevation process, we can challenge the user to provide a business reason why they want to be a local administrator. Again, if it's something that's commonly done within the organization, installing printer drivers, applications, updates, changing system settings, if you understand those situations in which somebody wants to become an admin, you can provide that as a reason for them to be able to choose during that process. Now, I think it's important to note that we're not actually limiting what somebody has access to as an admin. When you're an admin, you're an admin. We're not limiting those features, but more of this is self-reporting so that you can, down the line, through logging, be able to inspect and actually verify. These are all the things in which people think that they need to be an admin. What are they actually doing with those privileges? And we can talk about that later too, but trying to compare that. So a self-reporting mechanism to provide a business reason why you need to be a local administrator. And I guess two things here. One is we wanted this to be able to work even if you don't have an identity provider. You can add in the identity provider for that complexity and those user verification and assurances. The standard deployment with none of the fancy features would just let you click the button in the menu and get access to local admin privileges. But if you want some sort of user verification check to make sure that the person who's requesting admin privileges on that box, in fact, owns that box, then we can just simply prompt for Touch ID. So somebody could go through a biometric check and gate access to privileges behind that.
Side note too, there is nothing in the operating system that lets you stop a user from failing the biometric and falling back to password there too, which would make a great Apple feedback if you think that you should just have biometric available. Feedback.apple.com. So.
On the biometric front as well, we have just added support for WebAuthn. So if you want to be able to use passkeys, YubiKeys, anything that's WebAuthn based, FIDO2 based authentication, that's also available as a part of that escalation flow. So I'd said, at least as a part of the business reason, logging and reporting. So I think partially when you're going to implement this, if this is something you're trying to do, there's some due diligence around piloting it yourself, kind of learning the ins and outs of all the different events that we will report on. So I wanted to at least point out, hey, through documentation, there's a few simple commands that you could run locally on a device to understand maybe how verbose we are in reporting what that user is up to on that device. So you can, again, you get a better understanding of what transpires after somebody becomes a local administrator. What that eventually translates into then is having some sort of a scaled logging system. You want to be able to understand across your entire fleet, people are asking for privileges, great. If you want to know more about the reasons that they are looking for those privileges, also good, we can create filters around that. We've spent our time at least investing in making sure that Protect has a good understanding and can have the filters to report on those situations which somebody's requesting local admin privileges, but then trying to go a little bit further to investigate what is actually then happening when they request those admin privileges. This is not something that is proprietary or unique to Jamf Protect. It's just what we understand best. What Connect is doing is writing all of its events to the unified logging system of the Mac. Protect understands that. Protect can take that information and stream it to a SIM or SIEM of your choice so that you can do that reporting. But it's not, again, it's not proprietary to Protect, but we have existing templates and documentation where if you have access to Protect, you then can provide the information about privilege elevation to your InfoSec team or whoever has access to those applications.
And no good deed goes unpunished, so there are some gotchas out there in the world. First, I did want to point out that we are recommending that people who are using conditional access policies essentially disable MFA for the background password check. So that way your logs don't get filled with a billion different failed login attempts. Every time that we do a background password check and MFA is enabled, it shows up as a failure at Entra, but it's not really a failure. Now, the flip side of that, though, is if you want to use multi-factor authentication before you do privilege elevation, we are actually using the same app for the background password check as we are for the privilege elevation. So in this particular case, you've got two options. You can either enjoy a bunch of failures in your logs, or you can use the biometric on your device. This is a question that I will have later because I'd like to talk to Mike about some feature requests later. The other piece is, remember how we could limit the number of times that you could elevate per month? Well, a smarty pants is going to say, oh, I can only get 10 times per month. I better set the calendar back. Time tampering will be detected by Jamf Connect in the scenario if somebody thinks they're going to be cute. Unfortunately, there's a lot of other things that can trigger time tampering detection, including things like switching time zones legitimately or closing the lid on your computer for too long and then the update happens when it hits the time server and it just goes bonk, you've now been locked out. So if you create a policy that actually just clears the state P list and this one particular time tampering detected, you can actually, on behalf of the user, clear that error out that was mistaken. Or alternatively, let people elevate as many times as you want and just detect those elevations and collect that through the unified logging inside of Protect. The next thing is the wonderful world of, you didn't see anything. We weren't traveling through time at all. So I was told no jokes in the slides, Mike, remember? No jokes.
It wasn't from me.
But here's another perfect example. What happens if you do something that requires a restart or a log out and log back in? Well, if you're using Jamf Connect's menu bar application and you elevate your permissions, but then you log out and you happen to see a Jamf Connect login screen. Okay, Jamf Connect, I log in, Sean Rabbit, member of standard group, I get demoted back to standard. However, the timer's still running in the menu bar. In this particular case, the computer did exactly what we told it to do. We told it to elevate, we logged out, we told it, hey, you should check to see anybody logging in. Should they be part of a group? We demoted them. So the simple answer is if you do that, either reduce your elevation before you reboot, or just hit the button saying end it and just log back in again. It will count as one of your elevations, though, if you're doing a limit of elevations per month. And in this particular case, it's just as simple as going and clicking and saying, hey, it's got the standard in there, so I'm going to get demoted. So it's doing exactly what we told it to do. If you are using a local administrator system, a Laps account on devices, it's probably a good idea to hide that user account from being able to be adopted by a local user. Let's say that I'm putting Jamf Connect on for the very first time. I have an existing local user account. Fluffy bunnies on my computer, great. My username, however, in Entra is sean.rabbit@example.com. I'll have to go in and pick a local user account that is my local Unix username. So if I hide the hidden admin accounts on there that you decided to put on there for Laps purposes or for hacking into the CEO's computer late at night, you just want to list them here. You can also say, for those exact same users, when you do decide to log in with that Laps user account, to not prompt that user to have the password be matched to an identity provider. So those are settings that you can set as well. Alternatively, if you wanted to, you could just, I don't know, rotate that password for that user automatically with Jamf Pro. That's a really nice thing to do. We have documentation here on this QR code from a previous, we also did a previous session last year on that one. Or what's the point of having an admin account on a box if you can make admin accounts on demand? If you got Jamf Connect, why not just nuke that thing from orbit and get rid of any admin accounts that are unnecessary? The safest admin account on a machine is one that doesn't exist. So we did a previous session as well on that, and this is a link that Mark Buffington and myself did a year ago. Lots of stuff that we went over here. We talked about what happens with privileges on Macs and why we need to be admin in standard accounts. We talked about the current state of Jamf Connect and how to accomplish the tasks, some configuration tool pieces and gotchas. I have time for Q&A, but more importantly, I'd like a show of hands on something. Let's say that we were making a change to Jamf Connect privilege elevation, and we were going to make it so there was some app that you used in order to elevate your user rights that was different than the ROPG app. We would get rid of the errors. We would make that one not subject to MFA, but we want to have something subject to MFA in order to elevate. Who would use the exact same set of rules to elevate as to get into their Mac if they needed MFA? Would it be okay to do something like that? Who would want a separate set of rules, maybe a separate set of conditional access policies, different MFA rules for elevation versus just login? Okay. So this is basically running down the same exact way that I've been asking before, too. It looks like especially people with remote hands might have different needs for privilege elevation. So we'll have to talk about that a little bit later. I just want to thank you very much for helping us and for real-time product feedback and having that conversation. We're open for Q&A too, and Ben is somewhere around and has a microphone. If anybody's got questions, just raise your hand. He will come lumbering whichever direction necessary. I am blinded by the light, so here we go. Our first lucky customer.
Hey guys, it's an old story for me and maybe others here, but we don't have Jamf Protect. We have CrowdStrike. We have Beyond Trust for EPM. What's the thought on logging outside of Jamf Protect, like in Jamf Pro or somewhere else? Because if our security team says, okay, we can go to Jamf Connect to replace our EPM needs, the next question is, where do we find these audit logs?
I'll take this one fast for you. We're not logging in Jamf Protect. We're actually logging in the local system logs. However you want to collect that log and dump it into wherever you want it to go to is up to you. Like Mike was saying, it's completely agnostic. It'll just show up in the local system logs for you. Yeah.
As you were alluding to earlier, is there an active feature request I can go vote for to have a separate app registration for the elevation prompt?
There is.
There we go. There is one out there. We'll talk to us later. We can find it and you can vote on it there.
Thank you.
I'll ask AI to find it for me.
AI will find it. There you go. I like this plan.
Backing up a bit just with the platform SSO in general, we are really interested in the ability for your computer to sign you into things without having to re-put your password in. I understand password sync, the password sync part does that right now, but how do we utilize Secure Enclave but then still have that sort of feature?
Great question, because Secure Enclave mode with Platform Single Sign-On does literally nothing with a local account password. So in this particular case, you could enable Platform Single Sign-On, get a nice, secure, non-phishable, hardware-bound authentication method on your Mac that'll act as a possession factor and a knowledge factor, because you had to type your password to get into it. And it's totally separate from passwords. So you could still have a tool like Jamf Connect to log into the Mac, to enforce multi-factor authentication, and manage the password over time. Completely independent. I personally like that idea a lot because I find it a little bit scary to have a set of credentials built into the computer that literally anybody could walk up to at any time and be able to get, with no interaction, just here you go, here's access. I'd rather have access to the computer at least gated with multiple factors in that scenario. And Jamf Connect's a great combo, better together there.
Thank you.
I think we got time for like one last question here, and just in case you
This
can't.
one's a somewhat easy one. So I'm right now to do this very function. I'm using the Privileges app and
Excellent
doing
application.
a bunch of command line toggling on the back end to kind of have it work exactly the way I want it. So in my workflow, I don't want the users to have access to this unless somebody calls me and says, hey, I want to be able to do this. And then fine, I go in, add them to a static group. They have my puppet master of privileges.
You answered your own question.
And what, but
You call up the help desk, you get added to a group, you're in the group now, and now you get privilege elevation, right, Mike?
does that work with your product?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you're doing it through the IDP
Yep.
group management, yeah. So you could do IDP group management. That's one way. If you love command line interfaces, we have
Not necessarily.
Okay.
But
We do have a CLI tool built in to Connect. It's disabled by default so that local users aren't running it to necessarily self-elevate, but that's what it's there for. If you want to enable it, you can
like
manage
in
it
my
through
case,
policy.
I don't
or-
even have privileges installed on the Mac. What happens is I put the user in the static group. They get a self-service policy. They
Yeah, this would
fire
work
off
it through the
put
IDP
privileges
instead,
on,
so it could always be on there and
elevates
there's no delay in order for them to get that privilege management.
And then I had to get a self-destruct routine to
Yep, in this case, it
Pick
was
it
just
out of the
timeout, and there's great opportunities for some other sessions that have been out there too, talking about automations with, say, webhooks and whatnot, or the Okta workflows in order to automatically take people in and out of groups too. I'd highly recommend checking those out. Folks, just so you know, in case you want to chat some more, which I'm sure y'all will want to, I have no problem with leading y'all Pied Piper style up to the brain date that I'm about to be hosted here in 1 minute. Boy, they got a surprise. Or alternatively, Mike is around as well, and we'll be more than happy to answer questions. We are the last thing holding you up from going to the party, so feel free to come up and ask. And thank you very, very much for joining.